For decades, we believed the far side of the moon was just more of the same. More craters, more dust, more silence. A dead world, fully mapped, fully understood. That's the story we told ourselves. But that story has a problem. Because when NASA sent instruments to look deeper, not just at the surface, but beneath it, the data didn't match that picture, not even close. They weren't looking for anything unusual. This shouldn't have happened. But it did. What they found wasn't just another crater, not just another geological feature. It was something buried, something massive, something that shouldn't still be there after billions of years, and it wasn't alone. Thermal readings showed heat in places that should have been cold for eons. Gravity data revealed density where there should have been empty space. Magnetic signatures appeared on a world that shouldn't have any left. Individually, each of these could be explained. But together, they point to something we didn't expect, something the moon was never supposed to have. Because the far side isn't just different from the side we see, it's behaving like a completely different world. And the deeper we look, the less it makes sense. On April 6th, 2026, a spacecraft slipped behind the moon and disappeared. Not visually, physically. For 40 minutes, it passed into a region where no signal from Earth could reach it. No commands, no corrections, no communication of any kind. Just silence. Inside that spacecraft were 4 astronauts, orbiting a part of the moon no human had ever truly seen from that angle, at that distance, under that lighting. This wasn't exploration in the way we imagine it. There was no room for improvisation. Everything had already been decided. Trajectory locked, timing fixed, no turning back. They were following what's called a free return path, a precise arc of motion that uses the moon's gravity to send a spacecraft around it and back to Earth automatically. Safe, on paper. Because even if the engines failed completely, they would still come home. That's the theory. But that path comes with a cost. To follow it, the spacecraft has to pass directly behind the moon, into a region completely shielded from Earth by thousands of kilometers of solid rock. No line of sight, no signal, no help. And once they crossed that boundary, they were on their own. At exactly 6:44 p.m., the last transmission reached mission control. Clear, stable, routine. Then it cut off. Not abruptly, just gone. Because that's what happens on the far side. Everything continues exactly as planned. But from Earth's perspective, it's like the spacecraft stops existing. And whatever happens next, happens where no one can see it. Not in real time, not with certainty. Only later. After the signal comes back. If it comes back. Before the signal disappeared, one of the instruments had already started returning data that didn't fit. At first, it looked like noise. A slight deviation in the gravitational readings as the spacecraft approached the far side. Not dramatic, not alarming, just off. The kind of thing you see all the time in deep space measurements. Small inconsistencies, minor distortions. Usually explained away by calibration drift or local terrain variation. That's what it should have been. But it didn't go away. As the spacecraft moved closer, the readings intensified. Gravity was behaving unevenly, not stronger across the entire region, not weaker either, just distorted in a way that didn't match the surface features below. It should have lined up. That's how it works. Mass creates gravity. Craters, basins, mountains, they all leave predictable signatures. You map the surface, you predict the field. But here, the math didn't match the map. It was as if something dense was buried deep beneath the surface. Something large enough to pull on the spacecraft, without leaving a visible trace above. At the same time, thermal sensors began detecting slight temperature variations across areas that should have been uniformly cold. Not hot, not even warm, just less cold than expected. Subtle but consistent. Like heat was leaking upward from somewhere it shouldn't exist. The moon isn't supposed to do that anymore. Its internal heat should have dissipated billions of years ago. No active geology, no internal engine still running. That's the model. That's what we understand. And yet, here were 2 separate systems, gravity and temperature, both suggesting the same thing. Something beneath the surface wasn't behaving like a dead world. It should have been silent, but it wasn't. And then the signal cut out, right as the readings peaked, leaving the last confirmed data point hanging there, unexplained, unverified, and just incomplete enough. to be deeply uncomfortable. If it had just been the gravity readings, there would have been an explanation. If it had just been the heat, there would have been a model. But it didn't stop there. Because as the spacecraft moved deeper across the far side, a third system started reporting something that made even less sense. Magnetism. Weak, fragmented, but present. That shouldn't exist. The moon lost its global magnetic field billions of years ago. Whatever internal dynamo once generated it shut down long before life even began on Earth. What remained were only faint traces, localized patches of magnetized rock, leftovers from a distant past. Static, inactive, predictable. But these readings weren't static. They fluctuated. Small shifts, irregular pulses, not strong enough to affect the spacecraft directly, but enough to be detected, enough to be real. Now there were 3 anomalies. Gravity pulling where nothing was visible. Heat rising where nothing should be active. Magnetic signatures behaving as if something underneath still had structure. Each one on its own could be rationalized. Together, they began to overlap. And when you overlay them, gravity, heat, magnetism, they point to the same region, the same coordinates, deep beneath the surface. That's where the pattern breaks. Because the moon isn't supposed to have anything down there that can do all 3. Not anymore. Not after billions of years of cooling and decay. And yet, the deeper the data was analyzed, the clearer the alignment became. Something below the surface was dense enough to affect gravity, warm enough to affect temperature, and structured enough to influence magnetic readings. That combination shouldn't exist. Not naturally, not at that scale. And then there's the 4th layer, timing. Because these readings weren't constant. They peaked as the spacecraft passed overhead, then dropped off. As if whatever was causing them wasn't just there, but interacting, responding, or at the very least, not completely inert. Which raises a question no one wants to answer too quickly. If something under the moon's surface is still active, what exactly is it? And how long has it been there? Waiting? Unnoticed. On the side of the moon we never see. To understand why this is so unsettling, you have to picture what the moon is supposed to be, not what it looks like from Earth, what it actually is. A body that formed in violence, likely from a massive collision billions of years ago, then slowly cooled. Its interior solidified, its energy faded, its geological activity shut down. What remained was a shell, cold, stable, dead, no moving core, no circulating heat, no active magnetic engine, just rock. Layered, fractured, and frozen in time. Think of it like a campfire that burned out billions of years ago. The flames are gone. The heat is gone. All that's left is ash and stone. That's the moon we believe we're orbiting. But the data suggests something else, because what the spacecraft passed over doesn't behave like ash. It behaves like something buried beneath it, still holding heat, still holding structure. Imagine taking that dead campfire and finding a pocket underneath where embers are still glowing. Not on the surface, not visible, but deep below, insulated, preserved. That's not supposed to happen, not after that much time. Now add mass, a dense object buried under layers of rock, heavy enough to bend the path of a spacecraft passing hundreds of kilometers above it. Not spread out, concentrated, like a metal core that never dispersed. And then add magnetism. Not a global field, not a protective shield, but localized influence. As if certain materials down there are still aligned, still capable of interacting with charged particles in space. Individually, these things can exist. But together, they require conditions the moon shouldn't have anymore. Heat requires energy. Magnetism requires structure. Mass at that scale requires origin. And here's the problem. We know how the moon formed. We know how it cooled. We know what it should look like inside. Or at least, we thought we did. Because if all of that is correct, then what the spacecraft detected shouldn't exist. But it does. And it's sitting beneath a surface we've been looking at for centuries, without ever realizing what might be hiding underneath. Not everyone agrees on what the data means. Some scientists look at the readings and see something familiar. To them, this isn't a mystery. It's a known phenomenon, just observed with better instruments. They argue the gravity anomaly could be the remnant of an ancient asteroid impact. A dense metallic core buried beneath the surface billions of years ago. Not active, not changing, just still there. The heat, residual, trapped energy from long-dead volcanic activity, slowly leaking upward over time, weak but detectable with modern sensors. And the magnetism? Localized crustal fields, pockets of rock that were magnetized when the moon still had an active core, frozen in place ever since. From that perspective, nothing here is new. Nothing is alive, nothing is changing. It only looks strange because we're finally measuring it precisely. But others aren't convinced. Because the problem isn't that these explanations are impossible, it's that they don't fully line up. If the mass is ancient and static, why do the gravitational readings fluctuate as the spacecraft passes overhead? If the heat is just residual, why is it concentrated so precisely in one region instead of diffused across the surrounding area? And if the magnetism is fossilized, why does it show signs of variation instead of remaining constant? Individually, each explanation works. Together, they start to conflict. And that's where the uncertainty begins. One research team ran simulations assuming a buried metallic core from an ancient impact. The model matched the gravity data, but failed to reproduce the thermal signature. Another adjusted for subsurface heat pockets. That aligned with temperature readings, but required internal conditions the moon shouldn't still have. Every attempt to solve one part breaks another, which leaves a gap. Not a large one, but enough. Enough to raise a possibility that no one is ready to confirm, and no one can completely dismiss. What if this isn't just a leftover from the past? What if something down their eye is still active, not alive, not moving in any obvious way, but not entirely dormant either? And if that's true, then we're not just looking at a record of the moon's history. We're looking at something that is still part of its present, and we don't fully understand it. Inside the spacecraft, none of this feels abstract. There are no charts, no models, no debate, just four people and a window. As Orion moves across the far side, the surface below fills their view. Not the familiar face of the moon, the one humanity has stared at for thousands of years, but something harsher, more chaotic, a landscape that looks unfinished. Craters stacked on craters, shadows so deep they swallow light, ridges that stretch for kilometers like fractures in bone. One of the astronauts leans closer to the glass. At this distance, the surface doesn't look distant anymore. It looks close, too close. Another checks the instrument panel, numbers updating, quietly, constantly. Most of it routine, most of it expected, until it isn't. A value shifts slightly out of range. Not enough to trigger an alert, but enough to notice. He doesn't say anything right away, because there's a protocol for that. Verify first, cross-check. Don't jump to conclusions. But then another reading follows, then another. Small deviations, aligned in a way that feels intentional. Across the cabin, someone else is staring at the horizon line, the edge where sunlight cuts across the surface. Along that boundary, shadows stretch into shapes that don't quite look like terrain anymore. They look like openings, like depth, like something you could fall into. No one says it out loud, but they're all seeing the same thing. Not danger, not yet. Something harder to define, something that doesn't match the version of the moon they trained for. Back on Earth, families are watching scheduled updates, delayed images, pre-recorded clips, everything controlled, everything calm. A child points at the screen. Is that where they are? A parent nods. Yeah, they're right there. But they're not, because for these few minutes, the crew isn't where anyone can reach them. Not by signal, not by command, not by help. They are alone with a part of the moon that no human has ever truly experienced like this. And as the data continues to shift, quietly, subtly, the gap between what they expected to see and what's actually there gets just a little bit wider. As the spacecraft approaches the center of the region, the data stops drifting. It sharpens, not stabilizing, focusing. The gravitational readings spike, not across the entire area, but in a concentrated band directly beneath their trajectory. A pull that tightens just enough to register as something more than background variation. The onboard system compensates automatically. Micro adjustments to orientation. Tiny corrections to maintain the flight path. Nothing dramatic, but it wasn't in the plan. At the same time, thermal sensors register a narrow zone where temperatures rise again. Still cold by any human standard, but measurably warmer than everything around it. A gradient, defined, localized. As if heat is coming from below and not spreading outward the way it should. Inside the cabin, the crew doesn't feel it. There's no vibration, no sound, no visible sign that anything has changed. Only the numbers. And the numbers are becoming harder to ignore. One of the astronauts reads them out. Quietly, controlled, sticking to procedure. Another cross-checks against expected values. They don't match. Not anymore. Outside the window, the terrain shifts beneath them. The angle of sunlight changes, revealing structures that weren't visible before. Long shadows stretching across crater rims, cutting deeper into the surface. And then, a region where the light behaves differently. Not brighter, not darker, just uneven. Like the surface itself isn't interacting with it the way the rest of the moon does. The spacecraft continues forward, because it has to. There is no holding position here. No orbit correction that avoids this path. No delay. They are committed. Below them, the anomaly aligns. Gravity, heat, magnetism, all converging into the same space. And as they pass directly over it, the readings don't just increase, they synchronize. As if multiple systems are responding to the same underlying source at the exact same moment. Inside the spacecraft, that realization lands quietly. No alarms, no panic. Just a shift in attention. Because this isn't random anymore, it's a pattern. And they are moving straight through the center of it. At the exact moment they cross the center of the region, everything peaks. Not gradually, all at once. The gravitational pull tightens just enough to force another correction. Small, precise, automatic, but stronger than anything recorded so far in the past. At the same time, the thermal readings spike again. Still cold, but no longer consistent with anything surrounding it. And then, the magnetometer shifts. Not a steady fluctuation. A pulse, brief, irregular, but unmistakable. Inside the cabin, no one speaks. Because this is the moment where everything lines up. 3 independent systems, all reacting, all pointing to the same place beneath them. And there is no procedure for that. The onboard computer continues processing the data, feeding it into models that were never built for this combination. Predictions begin to drift. Calculations stretch to compensate for inputs that don't fully make sense. Still, the spacecraft holds its path. Because it must. There is no alternate trajectory, no way to pause and observe, no way to turn around, no way out, only forward. Below them, the surface looks unchanged. Rock, craters, shadows. Nothing moves, nothing reveals itself. And yet everything they're measuring suggests something is there. Something with mass, with heat, with structure. Something that shouldn't still exist. The gravitational correction hits again, slightly stronger this time. Not enough to destabilize the craft, enough to confirm it wasn't noise. The system compensates, again. Inside, yet one of the astronauts grips the side panel not out of fear but focus. Because now every number matters, every deviation means something. And there is no margin for misinterpretation. Because if the data is wrong, they don't know how wrong. And if the data is right, then they are flying over something that doesn't fit inside any model they trust. The magnetometer pulses again. Shorter this time, sharper, like interference or response. No one says it, but the thought is there, because timing matters. And this is happening exactly as they pass overhead. Not before, not after, now. And for these few moments, they are directly above something that is affecting their spacecraft in real time. Without warning, without explanation, and without any way to avoid it. There is no control, no backup, no way out. At 6:44 p.m., each the signal drops. Not because something failed, because that's exactly what was supposed to happen. The moon itself moves between the spacecraft and Earth, thousands of kilometers of solid rock blocking every radio frequency we can send or receive. From mission control, the data stream ends cleanly. No distortion, no warning, no noise, just silence. Inside the spacecraft, everything continues. The instruments are still running. The sensors are still recording. The anomaly is still directly beneath them. But now, no one on Earth can see it. No one can confirm what's happening. No one can help. The timing couldn't be worse because this is the exact window where the readings were peaking, where gravity, heat, and magnetism aligned. And now the only people witnessing it are the ones inside, alone. The onboard systems continue logging data, but without real-time transmission, there's no external verification. No second layer of analysis. No redundancy beyond what's already inside the spacecraft. And inside, conditions haven't stabilized. The magnetometer flickers again. Not a full pulse this time. Something weaker, less defined. The thermal readings fluctuate, just slightly, but enough to break the pattern they had been following. And the gravitational model stops matching entirely. Not by a large margin, but enough that predicted values and real measurements no longer overlap. Inside the cabin, that creates a different kind of tension. Not panic, uncertainty, because now every number they're seeing exists without confirmation. No one is validating it, no one is cross-checking it from the ground. And if something changes, they are the only ones who will know. For these 40 minutes, they are not just observers. They are the only record. Outside the window, the far side stretches endlessly. No Earth, no light from home, just a horizon that doesn't move the way you expect it to. Time slows, not physically, but perceptually. Every second carries more weight when there's no one on the other end of the signal. No voice, no feedback, just the quiet awareness that whatever is happening right now is happening without oversight, and possibly without full understanding. The instruments continue recording. The anomaly passes beneath them. The data builds, unseen, unverified, until the moment the signal returns, and whatever they captured becomes real to the rest of the world. At 7:24 p.m., the signal comes back. Not dramatically, quietly. A faint carrier wave first, then telemetry, then full data flow, restored as if nothing had happened. Inside mission control, no one speaks for a moment. They're not waiting for confirmation. They're waiting for consistency. Numbers begin to populate the screens. Time-stamped logs from the blackout window start syncing in sequence. Every second of those 40 minutes, recorded, stored, now finally visible. The spacecraft is stable, trajectory intact, systems operational, crew responsive, everything held. Technically, a voice cuts through the silence. Houston, Orion, we have you. Calm, controlled, routine, like they just stepped out of a normal pass, but the data says otherwise. As the logs unfold, the pattern becomes clear. The gravitational spikes weren't random. They formed a defined structure, a concentrated region with measurable boundaries. The thermal variations weren't noise. They mapped a localized heat source, consistent across multiple passes during the blackout. And the magnetic readings? They weren't static. They pulsed. Not continuously, not predictably, but in intervals that align almost perfectly with the spacecraft's position over that region. 3 systems, 3 confirmations, all pointing to the same place. Nothing failed. Nothing broke. The spacecraft passed through without damage, but the environment it passed through was not what it was supposed to be. On paper, the mission is a success. Trajectory executed, data collected, crew safe, but buried inside that success is something harder to categorize. Because what they recorded doesn't just expand our understanding of the moon. It challenges it. And now, for the first time, the data isn't theoretical. It's real, measured, and impossible to ignore. What they brought back wasn't just data. It was a contradiction. Because if those readings are correct, and every system says they are, then the moon is not the simple, inactive world we thought it was. Not entirely, not anymore. Because buried beneath that region is something that still interacts with its environment. Not on the surface, not visibly, but measurably. And that changes the question. This is no longer about what happened billions of years ago. It's about what is still happening now. The alignment of gravity, heat, and magnetism suggests a structure that hasn't fully dissipated. Something dense enough to distort motion, warm enough to affect temperature, and organized enough to influence magnetic fields. That combination doesn't fit cleanly into any existing model. Not impact debris, not residual heat, not fossilized magnetism. Each explanation works until you try to combine them. Then they break, which leaves something else. Not necessarily something artificial, not something alive, but something unresolved. part of the moon's interior that didn't cool the way we expected, that didn't settle into the static, predictable state we assumed. A system that, for reasons we don't fully understand, retained complexity, retained energy, retained influence. And if that's true, then the far side of the moon isn't just a geological record. It's an active environment, subtle, slow, almost invisible, but not finished. And that realization creates a ripple effect. Because the moon is one of the most studied objects in the solar system, we've built entire models of planetary formation based on it, used it as a baseline for understanding how rocky bodies evolve over time. If the moon doesn't behave the way we thought, then those models need to be questioned, rewritten. Because this isn't just about one anomaly on one world. It's about whether we actually understand how planets and moons stop evolving, or if some of them never fully do. And the deeper you follow that idea, the more uncomfortable it becomes. Because if something as familiar as the moon can still hold secrets like this, then what else out there is still changing without us realizing it? From Earth, the moon hasn't changed. It still rises the same way, still hangs in the sky with the same familiar shape, still looks quiet, distant, harmless, a constant, something we've trusted for as long as we've been human. People walk outside at night and glance up without thinking. It's just there, predictable, understood. Or at least, it feels that way. Because nothing in what NASA found changes what you see. There are no cracks glowing across the surface, no visible signs of movement, no indication that anything beneath it is different. All of that exists below, hidden, silent. And that's what makes it unsettling. Because for centuries, we believed that what we could see was enough to understand it, that mapping the surface meant understanding the whole. But now we know that isn't true. Not completely. Because beneath that surface is something that doesn't match the story we built. Something that didn't fully cool, didn't fully stop, didn't fully become what we expected. And if that's true, then the moon isn't just a relic of the past. It's a system we don't fully understand. Still, even now,
The thermal anomaly in the crater is
after
expanding.
everything we've learned,
Confirmed. Running
after
simulation now.
everything we've
What's the
mapped,
source, equipment or lunar?
and the next time you
It's the
look up
model.
at it,
Rerouting now.
Good.
it won't
Monitor
look
it.
any different.
Copy that.
But the idea of it will. Because that quiet, familiar object in the sky isn't just sitting there. It's holding something. Something we didn't expect. Something we're only just beginning to notice, and whatever it is, it's been there the whole time.